Well, let's do that. Hi, everyone. I'll give you a quick intro to me the same way. So you know how big companies, how they keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result every quarter, every year? I help them do something exactly the opposite of that. So I think some of you or many of you, I help companies innovate, whether it's through capability building or actually building new business models. So that's what I do. So we have what now 50 minutes or so left today. What I thought I'd do today is I don't love to just sort of talk and just present everything, but I find that in this Zoom medium and these Zoom days that it's best that I sort of tee things up and give you guys sort of a little presentation sort of thing about something that I'm really excited about that we've been sort of seeing in the world take place. And like this pandemic has only made it go faster, called business model shifts. And at the same time, while I'm going to present something to you, I asked you that if you want to be part of the conversation, that you speak up and ask me questions. Let me know if you want to go fast, slow, go back, go to something else. As Nikki would probably tell you, I'm a person who, while I love doing keynotes and all the rest on stages, I am just as happy just to have conversations and not have them be linear conversations. We can talk about anything you want, frankly. So does that sound good? Can I sort of, I'll tee things up with a presentation and then have you, if you want to ask questions along the way, you're going to do that?
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, let's do that. I'm going to share my screen. I already have it teed up to a slide deck. So this slide deck that I have shared here, this was actually a keynote I did a couple weeks ago and I've just updated a tiny bit for this, but a keynote I did a couple weeks ago for something called Product Development Days. So it was basically a product management, from mostly big organizations, product managers, and trying to figure out what they can do in their own worlds to innovate for some strange future. I'm a managing partner and a business designer at a company called Business Models Inc. So we do business model innovation, strategy, innovation, capability building, and a lot of those kinds of things. You see me online, so you see this is what I look like. So I live here in San Francisco. That's exactly where I am right now. In fact, just like many of you, if not all of you, I'm actually in my home. I'm actually in the kitchen right now, staring out the window. I show this because I'm a big outdoors person. Which is one reason I love working from home, because I'm not cooped up in a little, in my office, which Nikki used to go to. I now have free reign to sort of sit on my deck and look outside and be in the sun and everything else. So I'm a big believer in just being outside as much as possible. I come sort of from a big tech background. So I cut my teeth in big tech at a big company called Oracle, where I kind of did everything you could do from sort of sales engineering or technical sales to I was a software engineer for a while. And a lot of the time, maybe half the time at Oracle, I spent doing something like business consulting for clients. I left Oracle and then went through the startup meat grinder, where I was at a little startup and I thought I had some shares, and it was just sort of handshake deal, but we got acquired and eventually landed through a bunch of acquisitions at a big Swedish holding company, where at the same time I figured out that those shares through a handshake deal meant nothing. So I made no money on that, but that's fine. We learn. Then I ended up at another big tech company called Autodesk, which is a big design software company. And I basically ran product strategy and product management for the infrastructure engineering team there. I left there and opened up something called Business Models Inc. US. This is the America's version of a bigger international company. Bigger, you'll see what I mean, based out of Amsterdam. And yeah, we're a global team. I usually have a map here, but somehow it didn't show up. We're a global team of about 40 people all over the world, from Amsterdam to here in San Francisco, Taiwan, Australia. And this is what we do. We redesign businesses and redesign business models for our clients, and all the things that are intrinsically tied into that. And a lot of what I do is co-creation. And so when I say I'm really comfortable sort of stopping and starting and going wherever you want, a lot of it's because I work with people all day long in this regard and in this way. Um, we've worked with thousands of clients and done thousands of some, cool things and some very not so cool things. But this is just a handful of the clients that I've worked with over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. And some big ones, some small ones, some interesting ones, and some maybe more interesting ones. But frankly, most of my business comes from working with large enterprise clients, mostly B2B, although you see some sort of B2C type ones in here as well. But mostly B2B enterprise clients who, like I said at the very beginning in my intro, you know how there are lots of companies who do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result the next day. Those are the clients that I work with and pay me the most. I've also been fortunate enough and crazy enough to author and produce and be part of a bunch of books. So anyone who knows or maybe have seen before, there's a book called Business Model Generation. While I was not part of the writing of this, our company was part of the production of this book and helping to get it out into the world. Later on, I helped to add a little bit to another one called Value Proposition Design. And then in the last few years, I've now written a couple books. One, 2016, was published called Design a Better Business, which was really, really fun. And then another one coming out here November 30th, which is called Business Model Shifts, which I'll talk about today. So today I'm going to frame what we're talking about, and at least what I'm sort of teed up to talk about, as something called business model shifts, or I like to just call them shifts. And as you can imagine, in a global pandemic, there's no better time to think about business model shifts. But actually, I'd say all of us have to think about these things way before global pandemics come sweeping through our countries, cities, towns, villages, and homes. So in framing this whole thing up, I'll harken back to Jean-Baptiste Alphonse Karr, who was a French novelist and kind of an asshole, but at the same time, I really like this quote: "Plus ça change, plus la même chose," which is the more things, more or less, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And it sounds a little cliche, to use another French-based term, right? It sounds a little cliche, but it is totally, totally true, and especially in the business world. So now here, this is Lehman Brothers, which is a big financial institution, and in 2008, gone from the face of this earth. Thomas Cook, a giant travel agency, right? And a travel agency that actually turned into an actual travel company with its own fleet of planes and everything else, gone, right? This was gone during this pandemic. Borders, right? This was a bookstore, especially in the US, gone. Blockbuster, this is the famous one that we all know about, right? Gone, store closing. Now, these also seem like cliches. Here we have a couple people that look like they're from the music industry. This was my favorite record store in the world, and we had a beautiful one here in San Francisco. Gone. Right? In business, however, there's no such thing as wrong place, wrong time. There's only failure to act. And so I show you those things, not because they're cliche, not because they're the best examples of what happens when you don't shift your business, but also because I think they're really good examples of that these companies' failure to do something in time, or failure to do something over and over and over again as a cultural construct to get out of the way and to build something new. The premise of all this is that the world won't wait for you to get your ducks in a row. Our jobs, whether you're in university now, or I think half of us here are also in the business world, is to actually be looking for meteors all the time, and to expect that things like pandemics will exist, and to expect that pandemics will wipe out companies and competitors and everyone else, whether it's a global pandemic or something else. And our jobs are to design for disaster, to design for these things way up front, so that whatever happens, we can always do something about it, and perhaps even prosper because of it. So we use this, we're a very visual people here at Business Models Inc., and we use this all the time, this quick little sketch that my creative director Martin put together, which is At some point in time on the very left, there is the now. And this, for those of you who don't know what this is, and I'm not going to describe business models here in depth, but I'll talk through them. Um, this is the now. And for any company or for yourselves, right, and where you're at, the now exists as in like, what's our current business model? And at at every point in time, in and infinitum, there's this idea of the edge or the edge of innovation, which that edge is always pushing out to the right. Our jobs and maybe our clients' jobs as managers and entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs and everyone else is to over time continue to shift and push out as far as we can, as far as comfortable for our own culture, our capacity, our customers, everyone else, to continue over time moving out to the right, knowing that just as the universe is expanding, that we have to also continue to expand and move with it, move with that edge of innovation, so that we're never left in the dark, we're never left, having to close up shop, and that we always have some ability to make simple and maybe big shifts towards that edge as it continues to move out, as the world continues to change. So how do we do this, right? How do we actually manage change and manage how we're going to actually shift into some said future or futures for that matter? Well, first and foremost, a lot of shifts and a lot of business modeling doesn't come down to changing everything and changing the entire approach to business and even like finding it, building everything from brand new. Often it's just taking a step back and understanding, what do I have? What do I currently have in my quiver or in my portfolio of businesses? Here at BMI, we use this construct, which is the business model maturity curve, which is to say that even for startups, but definitely for most big companies, in fact, all big companies, there are always lots and lots of different business models going on there, and that are happening at all different points in time, but also happening at different stages. And the better we understand what we're doing and where our business models are, sort of sit today, the better ability we have to take some and sort of turn them off and take others and turn them on and optimize them or accelerate them in some way. And so, for instance, if I was to look at a big company, unquestionably the largest company in the world, Alibaba, what I'd see is, well, Alibaba's got this really interesting business model portfolio where it's sort of, long in the tooth businesses like Alibaba.com are certainly like, that's the execution engine that makes Alibaba a ton of money year in, year out. They just had Singles Day. I'm sure they brought in a few $1 billion in just a couple minutes, right? But as you sort of look towards the left of this, you see all kinds of other businesses that Alibaba's got. And I only listed a few here that are always sort of moving towards the right as well, that are moving towards being optimized, amplified, eventually sustained, and then perhaps eventually sort of let go or diversified from where those constituent parts can sort of get back into the matrix or the universe or be used for something else. And so a big part of just shifting in general is just, what do I have? What am I dealing with? How am I dealing with these things? A few of you mentioned that that you're also part of design and agile innovation. I don't know exactly what words you used. It sounded like a lot of the innovation speak, and so we can speak the same language. But I also tend to sort of think of this as, we have to use this design language, innovation language. Agile is what I used with these product managers like a couple weeks ago, to look for signals and not just existing trends. Again, I think of business model shifts in this whole innovation approach as looking for meteors and continually scanning the skies for meteors. And sometimes we can't really see them, but we can see little blips, or we can see that there's something that has moved in front of some other celestial body just through a radio signal or the loss thereof, or some kind of infrared or blips or whatever it may be. And that's our jobs, is to always look for signals and not just the trends, because the trends will only tell us that things continue to move up or things that continue to move down. But the signals may tell us something else. we did some work now a few years ago, and we continue to do work for some big banks. This was some work we did for ING, a big Dutch bank. And at the time, and this is years ago, at the time we were doing this work for this Dutch bank, and what we were doing, this is context analysis. And so we were pulling out not just trends, but we were trying to help them in a very visual way. This started with sticky notes, Post-its, by the way, in a very visual way to put something on their wall that told them a story about where the world of banking was headed. And you can see all kinds of funny things in here. One of my favorites is this little thing on this golf cart. It says 363. And what we got from them, by the way, was we're kind of like gone are the days, or going away are the days when a banker could actually borrow money, borrow money from big clearinghouses for 3%, sell it for 6%, right? So loan it out for 6%, and then be on the golf course by 3 o'clock. Those days are gone because people don't need banking anymore, or banks, they need banking, right? They need other things. And so what we did here was this was starting to paint a picture of where is the world going, and what signals could we pull in that tell a story that help to motivate people and to perhaps build something different.
Hey, Justin.
Yeah.
When you talk about let's look for the signals rather than the trends, I'm guessing there are a lot of people in those same companies who are scared stiff of exposing themselves to saying, hey, I think I see a signal here, because their friends and the rest will say,
Yep.
Let's do a trend analysis. So
totally.
Does it take somebody external like you? So I used to be at EY. So does it take somebody external like you to effectively amplify the signal spotters in the organization and give them credibility?
That's a great question. So first and foremost, I'd say it doesn't necessarily take someone like me to do that, although it helps, right? Because if they hire someone like me or someone like you or whoever, what they're doing is they're hiring some outside influencer to bring in, to bring the answers and potentially the pot at the end of the rainbow. However, I know plenty of companies that actually, they actually have people there. They either have cultures that allow for this thing. So for instance, at Autodesk, where I worked before, there was a culture that actually enabled us to pull together signals and then actually get some resources to work out new ways to utilize those signals to put new products out in the market or business models. And it awarded people for trying new small things, even in small ways. But you're right. At banks, for instance, that doesn't always exist. And when it does, sometimes it's people who run innovation groups or strategic foresight groups or things like that. I think what it takes mostly, irrespective of the company, is some scaffolding to allow people to sort of think in these ways, but also allow people to take their theories, their stories, and pitch them to do something about that. And so some banks have these sorts of things going on, but at the end of the day, it needs a setup or a culture that allows for it. And if it doesn't have that, then it might need someone like me or you or whoever to come in that gets paid to tell them these scary bedtime stories.
I was just saying that because we've got some moonshot pirates here who might feel intimidated because if they go to a big organization, they don't know the way things work around here.
That's right. That's right.
The one group who don't know how things work around here. Therefore,
that's right.
They can see the signs.
That's totally. I'd say, by the way, having worked for some of these companies, and like Oracle, for instance, again, I worked early in my career there. That was a company that loved trends, that loves technology. When I worked there, it was more selling software versus, renting software. So selling big boxes of software. It was not a company that actually liked strategic foresight. And what I learned there later in my career at Oracle was that it actually came down to strategic storytelling. And so as long as I was able to weave together the right story, I was always listened to at least like, that's really interesting. This guy's got a good, strong point of view. Let's let him think more about this or do something about it. But yeah, you're right. Different companies work in different ways, and different cultures either praise this sort of thing, or don't want this sort of thing to happen. And it's up to you to figure out what culture are you sitting inside of, and then use your own powers of persuasion, learn how to be a strategic storyteller, to really tell the right stories at the right time and place to the right set of people, and or bring in outside influencers or partners to help you with this sort of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anyone else? Okay, I'll continue to move on. So the third thing is, right, if we're sort of thinking about what do we have here, available to us, and if we have these things available, then what kind of signals are out there? And if we have those signals, then the next thing is, we'll look for ways to create more value using what we already have. And so if we see these signals, but we also know what is rooted inside of our business, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. We can actually start creating with what we already have. And one of my favorite metaphors for this is there was the famous Apollo 13 mission, and there was the movie Apollo 13 that did a pretty good job of this as well, right? The climax of this movie in many ways was this part where they were coming back in the lunar lander, and okay, now things are going okay. They figured out how to get off the moon. They figured out how to consolidate onto this one little limb module thing. And now they're figuring out that the thing is also busted, and that they're not going to have enough air or air filtration to even get home. And so what do? We can't go to Amazon and order a bunch of new parts. In fact, we've got nothing. We've got this thing that's thousands and thousands and thousands of kilometers from the Earth, that's floating in space and sort of making its way back towards Earth in some crazy trajectory. And we only have what we have. And so how do we piece together the parts based on only what we have in this vessel to come up with some really crazy novel new solution to fix a problem? And this is the prototype of the air scrubber that they came up with, using other constituent parts inside of these the module. And so I like to think about the same thing when it comes to business models. Again, I'm not going to cover business model canvas 101 in this, but if you don't know what a business model canvas is, go out and immediately go buy the book Business Model Generation. I promise you will not you'll not be upset by having bought this best-selling book of all time. But in a business model context, this is Nespresso. In a business model context, there's lots of different parts and elements, 9 boxes, that make up how I create, deliver, and capture value. And if we look at how we might actually do something for the future, one way to think about business model canvases is, what would happen if my whole business went away? What would I be left with? Well, what if I could choose the things that I'm left with? And so, for instance, maybe I want to focus on my current value propositions and the key resources I have that make these things what they are. What else could I do with these things if it's not exactly what I do today? And if you're a company like Nestle, which is the big company that owns Nespresso, well, there's a shit ton. There's a lot that they could do with just their current key resources, and even some of the current value propositions that come through in Nespresso. Same thing with, maybe I focus on some other box in this game board, in this canvas, which is, hey, I've got all these customer relationships. What could I do with these customer relationships if I was left with nothing? Again, perhaps there's a bunch I could do with these customer relationships if I was left with nothing. The key to this is, in these last 3 that I talked about, which is what do I have, which includes this in my current business model, and what I look for in signals, is I can use these things way ahead of time, before anything happens in the, fundamentally, game changing in the world. I can start to make these plans for the future and even start to test them out. So as I'm testing them out, things start to turn on in my world. And when a global pandemic runs through, or a meteor, or we have another stock market crash, I'm ready. I actually have things, and maybe these things are already out there doing what I want them to do. So we're seeing that everywhere, by the way. And these shifts are happening, even if people didn't know exactly that they were taking these steps to make them happen. They're happening. So what do you do, for instance, when you're not just a tech company, but you have a microbrewery and brew pub, and you're all of a sudden you're faced with this pandemic? Well, here's the story of one of these. There's this really cool brewery and brew pub, not far from me, actually kind of just down the street, a walk away, called Bear Bottle. And as you can imagine, Bear Bottle had this really thriving community, right? And they had this big tap room, and here's all the barrels, right, where they're fermenting, and they've got a bunch of barrel aged stuff, just a beautiful space. And in the back, sort of over here to the right, they had a little game room with some ping pong tables, and out in front they had food trucks, selling burritos and tacos and all kinds of stuff that came from the community that they didn't own. And so they had fostered this really cool thing. And what they found was, and they've found forever, was that when they set this up, the founder set this up, now 8 years ago, that people were visiting not just to drink beer, but actually, just like many pubs around the world, people were going for community. A pandemic wipes out everything, and wipes out the ability to show up to a place like this to foster community. Literally within days, the founders said, what do we have? What do we have going for us? Well, what we have going for us is, certainly we've got a bunch of bottled beer. Not everything is just in kegs. We're bottling and canning beer. So, okay, great. We can get stuff out there to people who want it, and they can come pick it up, or we can deliver it. But also the trigger went off in their heads. They said, hey, we know we have a thriving community. Why not just bring it online? And so the company did that. And literally almost immediately, they brought their thriving community of people who were now at home. And it's not like being at home meant we didn't want community. We wanted very much the same things we wanted before. That community thing ran through us and continues to run through us. And Bear Bottle just turned it around and said, sure, let's just keep the community going. We'll just do it on Zoom. And we'll do happy hours, and we'll do giveaways, and we'll have different people on there, and you can come pick up the beer, or we'll deliver it directly to you. Right. And so they set up a whole site to actually enable this, and and brought in community. In fact, they did so well at this that they started bringing in and bridging other breweries, and the breweries are really good at helping each other out. And they brought in other guest brewers to have these happy hours with them. And you see, these are no small things, right? These are huge Zoom rooms that they're doing this in, with sometimes 50, 100 people. Now, a few less than they certainly had at the brewery, but this actually has helped to foster that community and keep it going. In fact, again, it's done so well that they actually ended up having to hire more people to actually deal with the fulfillment of getting beer to people, so that people not only had beer at home, but they had beer at home while they were going to be on these communities, right? So this is a way to deal with it. It wasn't so sort of, woe is me, I need a loan to get through. It was, what do we have going for us now, and what have we set up so far, and how can we use that to continue to do what we really like to do, which is make and sell beer to people. So this is one of many, many shifts that's out there. And here at Business Models Inc., we've analyzed literally hundreds, if not thousands, of business models over the years. And what we found is that when we analyze all these business models, we actually started doing this way before this pandemic. What we found were that there are a few different patterns in there, and then patterns under patterns, that we've identified as very specific shifts that different companies have made over time, and that have been really, really prosperous and profitable. So shifts like circular shifts, where companies like Nike and Unilever and lots of others are shifting to be able to reuse resources, put those resources back into the system in a circular way to keep it going. And I think the Moonshot crew here, you totally recognize this pattern out there. Services shifts, where we've gone from products to offering services. And in some ways, you're sort of seeing some of that happen even in this Bear Bottle thing. Stakeholder shifts. Unilever is also part of this one as well. Stakeholder shifts, where we're actually doing things for more than just our shareholders, but bringing entire communities and the whole globe into our business model, and trying to do the best we can for everyone, partners and competitors included. Digital shifts, and this is definitely the Bear Bottle one, right? Moving from having purely physical foundations in our business model to enabling even when we had physicality in there, to enabling things to happen through digital modes. Platforms, we'll go into that a little bit, but Ubers and Lyfts and Airbnbs and others out there, and Amazon and Alibaba as well. And then, of course, something we call exponential shifts, which are very much in line with some of what you're talking about when you talk about moonshots. And a lot of what we talked about, this is not a shill just for this book, but we've now written in this book and it's coming out here November 30th. There are all these different ways that we're seeing companies shift and how you might take some of these patterns and apply them to your own businesses or to other companies. So for each one of these business models, we sort of looked at these business models and we looked at where is value being created. And when we looked at, where is value being created when you're moving from product to service, now there's other patterns that exist. So, you're looking at products and the value proposition was the product and what was part of that product to how do we solve some other customer job to be done with some experience and some performance and quality. How do we go from retail channels to I now own things if I have something as a service? How do I go from some one-time relationship and all the marketing and everything to go along with that to some long-term relationship? And how do I deal with communication with my clients then? And of course, go from pay per use or performance or so forth, or pay per unit to pay per use or pay per month. And from production facilities to utilizing data and information to do more in my business model, or moving to fleet and asset management, or partnering with other people and other companies to make this stuff happen, or going from materials in my cost structure to internet technology and people, and of course, accounting for negative impacts along the way. And so we've been looking at things in business models in a very scientific way and a very mathematical way to sort of look for patterns to see where there are shifts and see where perhaps we can help companies with these shifts. And out of this, we've seen a few, right? I've told you we've seen 6. And I want to just point out, we just have 15 minutes, I'll go really quickly through a couple of these. I want to point out a couple of the ones that stood out that were really, really interesting. And again, stop me because I'm going to keep talking. Stop me if you want to ask a question or you want to have a discussion about this. First and foremost, we saw some really crazy things happening when you have platform business models. And some other sort of sub patterns from patterns. So what's a platform, right? A platform is a business like an Amazon, for instance, or an Uber. And I'll just talk about Uber here for a moment. That connects consumers and producers, right? Often a platform actually doesn't create any more value than connecting producers and consumers in some unique way. And so if you look at Uber, right, what is Uber? Uber is for you and me, and of course it makes easy, ordering and picking up for, like taxis, that well. It's clear price up front. We get to review our drivers. There's no cash, and of course on the other side, there's income for drivers. Yeah, of course there's all kinds of crazy arguments that are happening right now around this, but let's just look at the fundamentals and not the good, the bad, and the ugly that come with these. Income opportunities for drivers, and of course they get easy pickup, and of course drivers can review us as well, so they can weed out sort of bad actors in the ecosystem. And of course, for drivers, they get easy administration, so they get to run their own little business, and they can see how profitable they are and where they've been and how they're doing it. So what have we learned from platforms like Uber? Well, first and foremost is that platform business models represent on their own a shift away from pipeline business models, which is create, deliver, and capture value, and just like have people go on their way. And an Uber business model connects people to continually do this over and over and over again. I'm not going to touch that business model. But what we've also found is that, of course, they're value triggers. And so the best platforms in the world connect on where the two sides are going to find the most value in this sort of thing. And so as a person who needs a ride from A to B, I'm going to find the most value in just doing that really, really, really simply. And if I'm a driver, the opposite is true, or the same is true. If I want to make some money and I've got a vehicle, I want it to be really, really simple. And there's some value triggers there. But what's also cool about platforms is that platforms always end up creating new customers. And so could be senior citizens who get off 40% off, and 40% less than regular taxi rides, or anyone else for that matter. It often actually is a whole new customer segment, students, not just students who actually are passengers, but students who are drivers, who now have income opportunities when they want. By the way, I've got a good friend who's an educator, and he drives for Uber and does Uber Eats as well, because he finds that, well, he's done with school, at 3 o'clock, and his kids can take care of themselves. It's his own kids. And so between 3 and 5 every day, he'll go deliver some meals, and he gets some money from that, right? And we see this as a network effect. It continues to expand and expand and expand, and create new customers, create new customer segments, and sort of platforms continue to expand. But also, almost every time, platforms create whole new platforms. So for instance, Uber turned into Uber Eats because when you look at the fundamentals of this business, they look almost exactly the same. It isn't any longer about delivering a person to a place, but it's delivering some food to a place, delivering food from a restaurant. And when you look at the business model, what you end up seeing is that restaurants end up being a whole new customer segment. Again, platforms always create new customer segments, but now platforms create new platforms, which create more customer segments. Network effect in action, which means restaurants now not only get what everyone else gets, but they get more clients out of this whole thing. And of course, platforms even create other platforms like Uber Fly. And Uber Fly will be one where there might be autonomous drones, but also, actually piloted planes and piloted helicopters. In fact, it already exists in some places like New York. And again, just like the restaurants, it looks very similar, which is I have whole new customer segments in here, but also those new customer segments are also part of new platform business models, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And so you get all this really, really interesting stuff happening. But it's also not always as obvious as what you get in an Uber situation. What do you do when you're a company like Clear? And for those of you who live in the US, Clear is a company that you see at airports primarily, and basically this gives you expedited passage through the airport and through the security lines at the airport because you're cleared up front. And what do you do when that business model? The business model is designed for busy airports, but it doesn't matter anymore because a global pandemic makes it so that no airport in the world is actually very busy any longer. Well, you learn that it isn't about the product anymore. It's about the value you're creating inside of that platform. And again, that you can utilize that platform and the value you're creating in other ways. And so while Clear has provided security based on identity, and it uses biometrics to do this, it allows you doing those things and creating that that value, which is biometrics and security, allows for expedited airport security to actually happen. This company has learned that that's not the only place that these things are needed. So in fact, even way before the pandemic, the same company had already been sort of setting these things up at stadiums, right? And so here in the US, in Seattle, it had set up a Clear station for expedited security checks and ticketing to get into stadiums really quickly, but also inside of the stadium for vending, but also to order beer. And of course, here in the US, you've got to be 21 to order beer. And so expedited process for doing exactly the same thing. But this is where platforms come in, because when you realize that the value propositions are in the biometrics and the data and the expedited processes, well, during this pandemic, the same company learned that this is what it was able to do, which is basically be able to do a full health pass, a full health checking system with expedited clearance to get into buildings, irrespective of the kind of building, except that the company started with this health pass thing for big employers that needed people to still be able to work inside of their building. And so in very much the same way as it worked inside of an airport, Clear has been set up to say, oh, well, we have all the biometrics, eye data, thumbprint data, all the temperature, excuse me, that's the dog, temperature checks and everything else from this to actually be able to get through. Second. This is what happens when we work from home. And of course, you sort of see that in the business model, and it plays through in the business model as well, that you get to see all this stuff actually happen, and you get to see that there are actually whole new customer segments, whole new value propositions, and this platform has created platforms, which is continuing to create platforms. And so we've also seen something called exponential shifts happen out there, and a whole string of these exponential shifts happen. And so when I mentioned Blockbuster before, it was also to set this up, which is Blockbuster went away mostly because a new company called Netflix came through that was founded by this guy, Marc Randolph and Hastings. And of course, it was done because videotapes were too expensive, and to ship DVDs was really simple and was a simple value proposition. It was relatively inexpensive to do. And Netflix started with something called a linear business model, which meant that it came on, it had 925 DVDs when the company started, and it was going to mass market, and it sort of had some sales and some rental, and it just rented these things out easy peasy all day long. And Netflix found that its linear business model was such that one DVD meant that it always created 2 times the revenue based on what it cost to buy that DVD and rent it out. And so it did a pretty good job at creating money and creating revenue from a very simple business model. But eventually the company went to flat fee and unlimited rentals, and it started to open up a bit more. And it had 35,000 films at the time, and lots of different titles, still mail order, but now subscription, which had helped it to sort of create more and more resonance in the market and more people wanting to do something with it. But where it really made its fundamental exponential shift was this personalization. Company went out into the world in 2006 and asked for people to come up with different algorithms, right? We're actually talking about AI and algorithms in 2006 to actually help create new recommendations and a recommendation engine inside of Netflix. In 2007, it actually started to come out with video on demand, and when paired with these algorithms, all of a sudden it started to see something called exponentiality start. In other words, what was happening was not only could people actually still rent DVDs, right, and with their subscription, but they can now watch video on demand, but also at the same time, the algorithms and the data kept recommending more and more and more and creating more and more resonance, that Netflix knew how to do this better, knew what DVDs to rent to get better, knew what titles to go out there and negotiate for better. And so, of course, these things happened almost independent of the business. These things sort of happened on their own and created more value than even Netflix was putting into this thing, just through algorithms and data and sort of streaming. But then the whole thing went into a whole new galaxy and launched itself into meteoric territory with this guy who's now sort of infamous, which is Kevin Spacey. But Kevin Spacey basically came along and helped Netflix create a whole new format, which was, he sort of said, hey, we're used to thinking in linear formats, and we come out with these shows, TV shows, for instance, you get one, and then you have to wait another week, and then you have to wait another week, and then you have to wait another week. Kevin Spacey said, hey, let's just publish everything all at once. Why wouldn't we just, who cares? Who cares how people watch this stuff? They just want the best content ever. And the more we have, the more they're going to watch, irrespective of what's going on. And so, of course, the network executives all out there, except for Netflix, they said, this is the worst idea ever. People won't do this. They'll never want this. And if they do this, we're going to lose a ton of ad revenue. But when you're Netflix, and you listen to this pitch that says device and length are irrelevant, and they just want the stories, and they just want to consume those stories as they like at a reasonable price. When you're Netflix, you're like, yeah, we don't care about ad revenue. Let's just do this. And of course, that created this crazy new business model that's totally exponential, which means not only does it now have this mass market and almost infinite content, but also, and unique content at that, but at the same time, it knows us so well that it continues to feed information back as a key resource. And that algorithm uses that information to then tee up the Netflix executives and producers to figure out what shows to actually buy, but also, even more importantly, what shows should be created, because the show like that doesn't exist. And they know that we're going to want that. And the more we want, the more we want, the more we want. Right? And this has just kept going and going and going and going. So it just keeps going. So I see that someone's got to leave here in just a moment. I'm going to wrap it up now. So how do we get there? And how do we get from 0 to 100? Well, first of all, we have to look at how we run our current businesses or how our clients run their businesses, which is most companies run their business. They think they run their businesses like this, right? They are running it sort of mostly today. Some they're looking at for tomorrow, and a little bit they're looking at for some imagined future. And of course, realistically, it actually doesn't look like that at all. Most companies, especially today in this pandemic, are cleaning up the shit of yesterday and then spending a little bit today and almost nothing on the day after tomorrow. But we should be flipping this around. We should spend as little as possible on today and tomorrow, knowing that those are things we just have to do anyways. And we should set up mechanisms to do that. And then we should be spending a lot of our time and effort, and certainly real resources, investigating possible futures and building those possible futures as we go. And this is definitely about shifting business models. And again, right, it's because just as nature isn't going to wait for us to catch up before it throws something else our way, our customers and our competitors also aren't waiting around. They're going to go to that next thing as it comes. And that thing is that edge that keeps pushing out. So that was fast and furious, and how we just have a couple minutes left. But that's the way it goes. This is only the second time I've given this talk. So I'll leave that here. Any questions, comments, concerns, call bullshit, you name it.
And just unmute yourselves and ask Justin. And I also connect you with Justin. So if there's any business thought, business opportunity, please feel free to
always. I'm always happy just to talk. Yeah.
Or always. Chat or ask.
Yeah. Nothing? Crystal clear?
I love that.
Marcus.
I love having the QR code of your LinkedIn connection. I think it's great.
Thank you. It makes it so easy. I think, I saw other people doing this. I didn't invent this, right? I saw other people doing it. I'm like, oh yeah, that's so crazy easy, because you don't have to look me up. You just, and everyone's got, you've all got your phones because you probably weren't watching. You're probably looking at your phone. So
crazy.
In the last minute, I'm going to use the last minute to let the cat out of the bag. I said in the beginning, there's a surprise. So each one of you will get a book. So please take the chat and type into the chat your address where I should send the book. Because it means that if you don't type in your address into the chat, I don't have your address, so you can't get a book. So use last minute to pencil in your address. And I will send you, I'll make sure that once the book is out, I'll order the books and I'll send you all of them.
2 weeks.
That's amazing.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes. Day one and already a surprise act.
Exactly. Thanks, thank you.
That's a hard act to follow now.
Yeah.
That's a disruptive thing to do, Justin.
Thank you so much, Justin. The books. I love the books.
Thank you.
Actually, I have mine in San Francisco. So my whole apartment is in a garage. Apartment in March, my whole apartment is in a garage. And if it's still there, which I don't know, I hope I'm going to be back in early January.
Nice. San Francisco's a different place. Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, I have a question. So far I understood, I have just looked up a little bit in your LinkedIn profile. So you are also a speaker.
I am.
This is right. So have you been ever before in Europe to speak?
A lot, yeah, a lot. I used to go. Okay. I used to go to Europe 6 times a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So because I'm one of the organizers of the Innovation Congress in Vilnius, Nikki knows all this. So would it be possible that you come sometime to us?
When we can go to Europe again, I'd love to. Yeah, I would love to.
Okay.
And if not, then I have lots of colleagues who are really good at this too. So no problem.
Yeah, so we should stay in contact.
yeah, I think.
And I'll connect you all.
You connect us, and you can see my LinkedIn here. So absolutely, unequivocally, this is what I do.
Yeah, great.
Justin, thank you so much. Oh, so Martin, go ahead.
Yeah. I have a lot of questions now, of course, because it's an area what I'm very interesting. So what happened with company? They not have any idea about their business model.
Most companies don't have any idea about their business models. Even the ones that do really, really well don't know how their business models work. So what happens to most companies when they don't know how their business model works, they get into oh shit moments, and then they end up having to spend a ton of money and a ton of resources and time to do something about those all at once, which are not good places to be, because often that means their culture also isn't ready for something new. So we see most companies actually fundamentally don't really agree on how their business model works, which means, you know, to me, that's always the first step. Anytime I get in front of someone or talk to someone, and I always want to know what's happening today? How does it work today? And can we get consensus around how it works today? Because if you can do that, if you know what the game pieces you're playing with, now you can know what game pieces you might play with in the future. If you don't know, then you're going to be always in this reinvent the world every day, and that's not a place anyone really wants to play. So that the short answer is most companies don't know how their current business model really works.
Surprised by their own success.
Yep, exactly. Okay.
Justin, thank you so much for opening up this week.
My pleasure. And I'm glad you guys all got to hear my dog Herschel.
Yeah,
he's having a great time. We're at home all the time, so now you got him.